I miss that sexy smile, looking for
I know, see, they teased me beforehand, I have to say. Jorge played the music and I was just rocking out. For you guys, for the audience, thought I was live, but no, weren't live. They got in my ear. They were like, Jed, we're not live yet. Dance party didn't start yet. So what do you know? This is how it goes. Got to start the dance party when you're feeling it, right, people? Well, welcome, first of all, everyone. We have Natalia here today.
Hello.
Tyler's
hello.
out. Natalia's filling in. She's a party. You know that. So it's going to be fun. Your super chats, by the way, we need them today. We have an amazing guest. I'm going to intro her in a second, but you need to subscribe. You need to hit like, and you need to get on in the comment section, get in those super chats. We're going to check in with Natalia throughout the show at least 2 times. I'm going to try for 3 to get some questions in for the amazing Riley Gaines, who is joining us today. You know Riley. You love Riley. Riley is a competitive swimmer, which for me is amazing because all I can do is doggy paddle in the water. Got to admit, I can swim underwater quite a bit of time, but I don't know how to swim properly. I don't know how to do any of that fancy stuff. But we have Riley here to talk to us about that today. And here's a little bit of background for those of you who don't know. Riley is a competitive swimmer on the University of Kentucky team. And she was launched into a bit of superstardom unexpectedly. She spoke out after tying with Lia Thomas, who we know is a biological male, at the NCAA Championships. She's been very outspoken in her defense of single-sex sports, defending women's sports for biological women and the integrity of those sports, and very, very open about talking about potential complications from compromising that. She's been met with plenty of heat, as you might imagine, from some in media for taking that strong stance. She's outspoken, she's gutsy, she's courageous, and she's an amazing swimmer. So she joins us today. We're going to talk about all of that and more. Riley, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. You described me as a lot cooler than I feel like I really am. So thank you.
Listen, my husband swims pretty well, not like amazing like you, and I am in awe of him at the pool. I just get in the water, you know. I mean, I don't need the water wings like my 2.5-year-old, but I'm just kind of feeling my way around. So when I see people like you, swimming is hard. And I say this as someone who used to be a runner. Swimming is really exhausting. So when you do that well, when you see a really good swimmer, you know instantly that person practiced a ton. Their lungs are amazing. They have like an incredible sense of like coordination. And we all know, right? Anybody who's done exercises, you hop in the water, you do those exercises, or you hop in the sand and you do them, and they get 10 times harder. So more power to you, man. I would love to start. We're going to have a pretty, intense conversation here about the future of women's sports. But I want to start by talking about your background and swimming and practice that went into this, because I think what gets lost here a lot of times for people is they don't really understand the hours and the commitment and how much actually goes into being a young athlete, so that when something compromises that, what that really means to you all because of how much of an investment you've made. So talk to me a little bit about when you started swimming, and when you first started, what did that look like in terms of time investment and whatnot? And what age were you?
Right. I actually absolutely love how you worded everything about it being an investment in something you spend your whole life doing, because that's exactly what it is. I started swimming when I was about 5.
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry, that was my watch. I started swimming when I was about 5 years old. Just summer swim, kind of floating around. And then when I was 8, my summer league coach told me, you should really do year round. You're really talented. So this meant that in 2nd grade, I was swimming 2 hours every single day, which it only really got worse, or I should say harder from there. You don't have vacations. You don't have spring break. You have Christmas training. It's a pretty intense schedule. And then once you get to that collegiate level, you're practicing 5.5 hours in the water every single day. That's not including any sort of lifting. It's not including any sort of workouts we have outside of the water. That's solely being in the water. So it's a huge time commitment and a lifelong sacrifice.
So you're saying that once you hit that college level, you're doing 5.5 hours a day in the water, and then an additional training schedule in the gym. I don't know if you run, I don't know what you do. So you're essentially doing schoolwork and swim, and that's where it ends. Am I wrong?
Right. No, you're exactly right. We're in the water 2.5 hours. before 8 a.m. Then we have classes all day. You're back at the pool at 2 p.m. and you practice until about 4:30 or so. Then you finish your homework, you eat dinner, you ice your injuries, and then you do it all again the next day.
So you got a spot on the University of Kentucky women's team. What was that like for you when you found that out? And what happened to your life at that moment in terms of amping up what you've just been talking about in terms of practices and whatnot?
Yeah, it was a huge adjustment for me to go from high school swimming, where obviously it's still a huge deal. It's hard. It's still a huge time investment. But being at that collegiate level, walking around campus, people look at you, they know who you are. It's a lot of added pressure, but it makes it more worthwhile in a sense. So it's just this incredible experience. I really loved the University of Kentucky. They pushed me to be the best I could be in the pool, outside of the pool, in the community. And so I could not be more grateful for my experience there.
So now in November of 2021, you came to know the name Lia Thomas. My understanding is I had read that you were reading an article that had mentioned a female swimmer who went 1 minute and 41 seconds in the 200-yard freestyle. I hope I'm saying all these right. I don't know much about swimming, so I'm doing my best. But is that correct? And if so, what did you know about Lia at that point?
Right. So around that November time is about the middle of our season. And typically in that part of the season, you have every team going to a meets. And this is where your top times so far this year are posted. And so I was shooting for that national championship spot, and I was ranked, I believe, third. And so, obviously I'm curious of who's above me. And so I see this time posted that's just incredible, but it was a name I had never heard of, which, like any sport, your top athletes know your other top athletes, regardless of what school they go to. And so I see this name, and I'm shocked. I'm like, who is this person? They go to UPenn, which isn't typically a fast swimming school. They're a senior, and I've never heard of them. This is very bizarre. But I went back to training, focused on myself, and then a couple days later, an article was posted disclosing that Lia Thomas was formerly Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the male side at UPenn. And so honestly, when I found out this information, I was relieved. I was like, oh, this makes total sense, no question in my mind how this person went the fastest time in all of college swimming by a landslide. And I thought for sure, the NCAA will never let it get to the point where we're competing against Thomas. So I felt like a weight was off my shoulders, and I was less threatened for that national championship spot. But I was proven very wrong.
So 2 questions for you. For people who don't know a lot about swimming, this 1 minute and 41 seconds, can you just contextualize that? How fast is that? Like, is that reachable? Is that something like, what does that mean to a female swimmer to see a time like that? Were you thinking like, oh my gosh, how am I going to catch that? Or like, what is there an equivalent that you can give for people who don't really know much about swimming?
Yes. So it's obviously being the fastest time in the country in front of all the female Olympians, in front of everyone from the ages 18 to 22 who swam that event, the fastest by probably 2 seconds at this point. And 2 seconds doesn't sound like a lot, but we're measuring swimming in the hundreds. Right. So 2 seconds is a huge amount, especially in an event where it's not, a distance event. That event is something that at the national level is separated by tenths. And so to have someone beating the whole women's field by seconds, it is a huge difference.
So now you say you were relieved because you were probably thinking at that point, well, they're not going to allow Lia to swim at the NCAA, so this is not someone I'm going to need to compete with. What was your reaction when you heard that, in fact, Lia would be allowed to swim at the NCAA?
So from that November time up until we competed against each other in March, the NCAA was very wishy-washy. They would go back and forth saying, Thomas can't compete, Thomas can compete. And it was about 2 or 3 weeks before we actually competed where they said Thomas will be able to swim with the females. And I was shocked. I had no idea what this would look like. I had no idea the kind of media that would be brought to swimming. But I did know it was going to be a distraction to myself and the other female athletes at that meet. And I knew that it would cause a lot of controversy. And that's exactly what it's done. But to be in that position where you're racing someone who spent 3 years racing against the best men and now is competing against females, it just almost felt like you were swimming with your hands tied behind your back.
Now, you say they were wishy-washy, the NCAA. Why do you think they were wishy-washy, and why ultimately do you think they made the decision that they did?
I think they were wishy-washy because they lacked any sort of accountability. They were looking for other people to make that decision. They were looking at USA Swimming to hopefully have guidelines in place that they could follow. They were looking at the International Olympic Committee for certain guidelines. But of course, no one was willing to, ultimately come out with a decision that was clear and that was based upon science and reason and logic and common sense. And so ultimately, I think they made a bad decision. And I think that they're realizing that, but of course, still no accountability is had.
So take me behind the scenes at that moment. What are the conversations like among the teammates, among you and the other women on the team? What's getting said about this decision that's been made, and how is everyone feeling going into the NCAA at that point?
It's extremely frustrating. That first day is the day that Thomas won a national title in the 500 freestyle. And the look of these poor girls on the pool deck who sat there and watched this, or the girls who were in the lanes next to Thomas who got destroyed, it was just utter heartbreak. It's disheartening to know that you dedicate your lives to an organization like the NCAA for them to completely turn their back and prioritize, men. And so there was gruntles of frustration. I can't even tell you how uncomfortable the locker room situation was. And like you said, it was a distraction. I think there was about 7 American records broken by obviously the fastest females in American history, but the media didn't hear a word about these females. All of the attention was centered around Thomas. And so it took a lot away from us and what it's taken for us to get there and the accomplishments that we achieved.
Was anyone vocal at that point that you know of? Is it, swimmers going to coaches, complaining? Is there a sense of fear to say anything? How much communication about what the female swimmers were actually feeling was hitting the coaches or hitting people at an administrative level at that point?
So I think there was a lot of this information hitting the coaches. I just don't know if they did anything with it. Like I said, we spend so much time with our coaches that we're all really comfortable, at least on my team. My coach knew exactly how I felt and the rest of my teammates felt. But no one really knew necessarily who to complain to, one, since this happened so fast. Mm-hmm. And 2, you are told that you won't get a job in the future if you speak up about this. You'll lose your athletic scholarships. Actually, the Ivy League sent out an email to their swimmers saying that if they felt uncomfortable seeing male genitalia in the locker room, here are some resources for you. So you just felt like your feelings were not validated. You felt like you were crazy for thinking this is unfair. And I truly did. I thought, no one is speaking about this. Am I missing something? Mm-hmm. Is there something that I'm not seeing that's happening here that is, allowing this, enabling this? Is there a reason why people are doing this? And of course, that wasn't the case. And once I finally got to the point where I realized that, that's when I was ready to speak out.
Yeah, it sounds like the messaging was, if you feel uncomfortable as a biological female in the locker room, get used to it, and here's some tips as to how to handle it. Not the other way around. Not, well, maybe this is an actual problem. And I want to talk about that, about the locker room, because oftentimes the media will say, oh, that's not a real thing. That's just hyped up political talking points that people are trying to score, in the midst of a culture war, and it's not real. What is the real sentiment that goes on inside a locker room where you have biological females and then suddenly you have a biological male that enters that locker room and is changing? I don't know, I guess you guys take showers in there. I don't know what it looks like, but just walk me through what that experience is like. I truly cannot imagine.
Right. So especially in a sport like swimming, where you do have to undress, you put your suit on. After warm up, you go into the locker room to put a different suit on, which takes about 15 minutes. So you're, fully exposed. These suits are skin tight. So it's kind of an ordeal putting them on. But, you're led to believe that a locker room is a place you can be vulnerable with your teammates, with other people who share the same anatomy. But when you're standing in there, one, when you're not forewarned that you will be sharing that space with a male, because we had no idea what that was going to look like. And you're completely naked, and a 6'4" male walks in who still has all male parts and actually still likes females, still is sexually attracted to females. How is this not sexual harassment of some form? It's absolutely insane. It's uncomfortable. It's a violation of our privacy and of our rights as females to have that safe space where you can undress, without having to feel like male eyes are on you.
Was in the locker room, was Lia kind of like off on her own, or was she integrated into? I'm just trying to visualize. Is it a bunch of biological females kind of off to one side and then Lia over here, or did it look more integrated? What did it look like if I were to just walk in and look around? Would I have noticed that there was tension in the air, or there was feelings of discomfort in the air?
I think you definitely would have noticed, because, these are girls who, you're competing with teams all over the nation. You have friends all over the nation. You're so excited to see each other. The locker room is a place normally of chatter and just people, getting to rekindle friendships. It's an awesome experience, especially at that level. But when a 6'4" male walks in, it's silent, which is not the norm. It's nothing like I've ever seen before. So to answer your question, would you have noticed? First of all, you would have noticed based off sheer height and obviously any sort of anatomy differences going on. But yes, it was definitely a different experience than I've ever been a part of. And I've been in locker rooms, the past 15 years. Mm-hmm. So
I'm curious if you know anything about whether parents at this point were making any complaints, because I imagine there were a lot of parents who had daughters who were on this team, or, are maybe even involved in other sports and kind of looking at the trend and feeling uncomfortable with this. Do you know if there were any complaints made from parents at that time, or conversations that were had behind the scenes between parents and administrators?
For sure. I know my parents were not happy about it. My dad, this is something that he wanted to handle himself. I'm like, Dad, but it's dads are not okay with their daughters being in that situation. Moms aren't either. But from a dad's perspective, this 5 years ago, this would have never happened. And had it have happened, it would be this person's locked up in jail. But now we're turning away from that. And instead of that being sexual harassment, it's sexual harassment under Biden's new Title IX to refer to Thomas as the wrong pronouns, to refer to any transgender as the wrong pronouns. And so we're expected to believe, we're prompted to believe that, that is okay. And actually, this is something they're praising. They're encouraging this. So it's insane.
Yeah. You said 5 years ago, this wouldn't have happened this way. I think that's true. And I would just invite people in the audience who are watching now, just imagine what's going to be the case 5 years from now. Right. We always talk about the slippery slope on this show. It's getting awfully slippery, as I say. What does that look like? If this is what the present looks like, tell me what 5 years from now looks like. I also want to remind everyone in the chat, please send your questions, your comments via Super Chat. We're going to read those. Please subscribe, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button if you enjoy this interview, because we have a lot more coming. So Riley, you wind up racing Lia Thomas in the 200-yard freestyle at the NCAA. You tie for 5th place. Talk to me about that day.
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, we're measuring swimming down to the hundredths. So to go the exact same time down to the hundredth is pretty rare. It's pretty crazy to do. And so, like you said, we tied. This was the day after Thomas won the national title. And so we go behind the awards podium where we're going to get our trophies distributed to us, and then we're kind of paraded out. But the official looks at me and says, "Great swim. We don't really account for ties, so we only have one trophy. We're going to give that trophy to Thomas. Riley, yours will eventually come in the mail. Great job." And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, I understand we don't account for ties. It's, pretty rare to do. But can I ask you why you're adamant on giving this trophy to Thomas, especially after winning a national title last night? Is there a reasoning? And he looks at me and says, well, we're just doing this in chronological order. And so I realized what's happening now. And I asked him, okay, well, we went the exact same time. So what are we being chronological about? And he looks at me and says, for photo purposes, Thomas has to have the trophy. You can pose with the 6th place trophy since that's what we have, but yours will eventually just come in the mail. And so it was at this point that I was done waiting for someone with some sort of political power, someone with some authority to change these guidelines to say something. I took it upon myself as a 22-year-old girl to speak out on how crazy this is, because it was in this instance I realized, not only are we being forced to compete against men, change in a locker room with men, we're being put on the back burner. We're being sidelined to men. And this is showing to me that the females category is in total jeopardy here.
Yeah, interesting to me that in this moment, all the so-called feminists have been quiet. We have an image of that. Natalia, if you can pull up the New York Post image, because what you're talking about is true. You have a biological male that wound up holding the trophy. And in fact, it was a photo op. I mean, it's very clear to me that the reason that happened was because the woke media wanted their photo opportunity. So you see this image. Immediately, the size difference, I think, stuns everyone. That was what registered in the minds of people who didn't really realize how big Lia was in comparison. You look at this image today, and what emotions do you feel thinking about that moment and reliving that moment by just looking at this picture?
It's just honestly frustration. But now looking back on it, I really hate to say right place, right time, but I do think that I was put in a position where it's given me a fantastic story to really shine light on what this issue is doing to female sports. I think it's kind of God put me there for a reason, which is kind of crazy to say, because not to say I expected any of this to come from it, but I think it's great that we're having this conversation. We're being explicitly shown what this is doing to female athletes. And so for that reason, I can look at it a bit optimistically now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to talk about that, a little bit about, faith, and a little bit about, maybe you were placed there because you were willing to speak out when a lot of people were not. I want to just bring up a couple of facts for people from some columns. I did a little bit of research. I think this is interesting, and we'll get your reaction. I was looking at Swimming World magazine, and this is talking about advantages that Lia Thomas has. And here's a quote from that article, and then I just want to get your response. This is what it says. Just how much of an advantage did Lia Thomas possess over biological females? The numbers paint a clear picture. The fact that the University of Pennsylvania swimmers soared from a mid-500s ranking, 554th in the 200 freestyle, all divisions, in men's competition, to one of the top-ranked swimmers in women's competition tells the story of the unfairness which unfolded at the NCAA level. Can you just speak a little bit to that dynamic and just how, to me as an onlooker, it is utterly ridiculous that given this information that you would have this biological male competing against biological females, and how infuriating it must be for you. But speak to the disadvantage that you feel that you have just biologically in a situation like that.
Right. So swimming is the sport that requires endurance. It requires strength. It requires power. It requires lung capacity, aerobic capacity. There are so many different pieces in this sport that really matter. So I'm going to highlight a few of them. That's not just height, because obviously that plays a part, but it's so much more than that. Longer limbs, your lung size, your heart size, no breast tissue. That has a huge impact. Males have 40% larger throats, which enables you to get air, which oxygenates your blood and your muscles. So there are so many different pieces that will never be mitigated, even with testosterone suppression. And I think that's the piece that a lot of people aren't seeing clearly, is that, well, Lia was taking hormone suppression for a year. That, in the grand scheme of things, yes, marginally decreased Lia's times in terms of what Lia was going as a male, but it still skyrocketed her above every other female at that meet. This was not a lateral movement. This wasn't Lia going from 500s in the males to 500s in the females. this was Lia going from 500s in the males to winning a national title, being the fastest woman in all of college swimming. And so to sit here and see those statistics right in front of us and people still aren't grasping this, it's insane. I think another point to bring up is, why don't we have transgender males, so females transitioning to males, swimming in the men's category, playing any sport in the men's category? It's because they wouldn't make it. They can't. And no matter how much testosterone you take, there are certain physiological advantages that you can never overcome. And I think it's worth mentioning that actually we had another transgender athlete at the meet that the media has done a terrible job covering. We had a swimmer who was formerly Izzy, who now goes by Isaac, is a biological female transitioning to male, used the pronouns he, him, actually swam completely topless in one of the races as a biological female. But of course, we're not talking about the women's category having both types of transitioning occurring there. We're really just talking about Lia Thomas. And so I think it's really important that we hit on the fact that we also had a female to male in the women's category. Why
do you think the media has no interest in that discussion, or that component has been ignored?
I think this instance highlights perfectly that this isn't, like I mentioned, something that's just lateral. Sports don't care how you feel. Sports don't care what you identify as. This is one of the few aspects of life that looks at biology. It is not based off what you identify as. And so I feel like they've done a terrible job covering this because they don't want to bring it to light. They don't want people to know that the women's category is the catch-all in a sense. But it's perfect evidence that females, if this other transgender athlete, Isaac, would have competed with the males or would have tried to, nowhere close. But Isaac was in the A final, which is the top 8 in the country, in the women's category, after, of course, identifying as a male.
It's unbelievable to me. The more you sit and think about this stuff, the crazier it truly gets. You mentioned quite a bit about how it's not just about testosterone. I think that's a very important point. And it's backed up by something I wanted to bring up. This was a column at The Wired that talked about, it's titled "The Glorious Victories of Trans Athletes Are Shaking Up Sports." Here, I want to read you a little section on that. It says, in the NCAA, for example, transgender women can compete on women's teams after they've completed 1 year of testosterone suppression treatment. 1 year. But the organization doesn't place limits on what a transgender athlete's testosterone levels can be. And here's the part that gets interesting. Transgender women's performances generally decline as their testosterone does, but not every male advantage dissipates when testosterone drops. Some advantages, and these are some that Riley had mentioned, such as their bigger bone structure, greater lung capacity, and larger heart size, remain, says Alison Heather, a physiologist at the University of Otago in New Zealand. Testosterone also promotes muscle memory and ability to regain muscle mass after a period of detraining by increasing the number of nuclei in muscles. And these added nuclei don't go away. Very important. So transgender women have a heightened ability to build strength even after they transition. So, Riley, my point here is this is a very complex issue. And I've heard the conversation, really boil down for many, about hormones and testosterone and this. And it's really much more complicated than even that, or even size, because this implies that even after transitioning, there are still advantages that those biological men will have. When you hear that and other female athletes hear that, how do you not get discouraged?
Exactly. No, you're exactly right. It's so much more than height. And I think people look at it and say, oh, there's tall females too. Of course, but there aren't females with the same limb structure. There aren't females with the same size heart. There's not females with the same size lungs. And it is super easy to get discouraged by seeing that, especially as this is happening more rapidly. It's becoming rampant across all divisions, all sports, all ages. It's very hard to not get discouraged. But that's why I'm continuing to speak out, is to hopefully shed light on what happened, the statistics behind this. Obviously, I'm not a scientist, but I don't think you have to be to understand these things, and how this is affecting female athletes.
Natalia, I'm going to come to you in a second. I just wanted to give you a heads up. So let me know, super chats, questions, comments, anything that you want to share on this. I'm going to be visiting that in just a second. But Riley, I want to ask you why you chose to speak out, because my issue with this oftentimes, and I know a lot of people have this same issue, is they say, if this is really affecting women, then women need to be the ones speaking out on this issue. And there are so many who are silent. Why did you make the decision to speak out? And why do you think a lot of women in your position choose not to speak out?
I think people don't speak out because they're scared. They're told they'll be canceled. They have to face the woke mob. But speaking from my experience, I have had tenfold support in comparison to anything negative. The only negative comments that I've received, which has been very few, is either you're transphobic, which is not true. You're bad at swimming. Why didn't you just swim faster? I'm not bad at swimming. Or you're ugly, which I also don't think is true. And so those
ridiculous
things, it rolls off my back. And I wish more people would realize that there are so many more people in this country who can recognize that this is wrong and recognize that this is unfair. But it's been made evident that the minority here is loud about it, and they're wanting you to believe there are more people agreeing with them than there really are. I mean, females make up 50%, let's say, of the world's population. Mm-hmm. The transgender community, I don't know exact statistics, but 0.5%. So we're really catering everything that, the past 50 years, Title IX has aimed to, what it's aimed to improve and what it was intended or created to protect. We're catering that to maybe 0.5% of the population.
I mean, it's utterly ridiculous to say that it's transphobic, to simply acknowledge biological differences between men and women, and to simply acknowledge that if you have biological men infiltrating women's sports for biological women, there's going to be an injustice, a grave injustice, and it's happening. Right. You see it. So it's that is a very weak talking point. And I say this all the time. These people who don't know how to really debate the issue or aren't on the side of facts, they just vomit out these words: transphobic, bigoted, racist. I mean, whatever word they can come up with. You're ugly. I mean, utterly ridiculous stuff, oftentimes personal attacks, because they are not on the side of the facts and not on the side of reality. And this is a pattern that we unfortunately see unfolding in many different arenas, not just this one, but also the political arena and whatnot. I want to just ask you before we go over to Natalia. You've been very lucky, and then we're going to come back for a few more questions. You've been very lucky to have the support of your university. Do you hear from any students who see you out there front and center? You've been on some very big name shows talking about this. Do you hear from them saying they don't necessarily have the support, they are scared, asking advice, what to do, wanting to speak out but being concerned? Have you had those conversations behind the scenes?
Oh, yeah. I've realized that my situation is an anomaly. That's why in the beginning of this interview, I mentioned how grateful I am for the University of Kentucky for, protecting me and encouraging me to speak my heart. Because there are so many girls across the NCAA who have said to me, my coaches won't let me say anything. My athletic director won't let me speak out about this. They want me to go to media training. I actually had tons of Lia's teammates reach out to me and say, how can we speak out about this? What can we do without having our athletic careers threatened and things like that? And so it is definitely like they are trying to instill fear among their athletes. And it's wrong. At this point, this is becoming our freedom of speech is being infringed upon. So it's not just at this point our athletics. There's so much more that's going into this now. And so I'm just really grateful that I haven't had to deal with that. I don't know if it would have changed much since I am someone who has always been brought up to speak my mind, to never waver from your beliefs. And so, but I'm extremely grateful that I have had that support because it makes a difference.
Yeah, let me just remind the women out there, any female athletes who are listening to this, there is power in numbers always. So it may be terrifying for you to speak out on your own. It becomes much less terrifying when there are many people involved. And I say this, audience knows, I say this about every issue, that even, during COVID times, I was advocating for businesses to speak up and saying you have to kind of speak up together. It can't just be one business. It has to be businesses at large. So if you're out there and you're worried about speaking up, the answer may be to solidify a group of women who are valuable, who have trained extensively, and speak out together, because that always makes a bigger mark. And it becomes much harder to penalize people when they're standing firm together on an issue. Natalia, I'm going to come over to you. Do you have any comments or stuff in the chat that we want to share? I'm sure people are loving this. So
yes, very, very interesting. We actually have 2 super chats from Pamela Eli. She said, "Run for Congress. We need courageous people." And then we got another one that said, "Oh, wow, 2 gorgeous real women." That was $3. Thank you. And then we had 2 questions for you. Well, one was a comment. "Men support you. We need more women like you to support us in our defense of traditional values. You are the real champ. God bless." And then we had another one. "Please ask Riley what it was like meeting President Trump and if she got to speak to him off stage. If so, what was the conversation like?"
Yeah, so let's do Trump first. Let's hear about Trump first.
So at CPAC, a couple weeks ago, they asked me to participate in a panel. It was titled "I'm Not a Biologist," and it was a panel surrounding, this whole issue, women in sports and what's at stake here. And so, of course, I agreed. It was an incredible experience. I spoke to so many people. And later that night, Trump was speaking. And so I had one of his people actually come up to me. I don't know necessarily what their role was in terms of their job title, but he came up to me and said, "Trump is requesting a private meeting with you. Would you be interested?" I was like, "Of course, this is awesome." And so I met with Trump. He was fantastic. He was super personable. He basically told me that in my speech, I'm going to mention, this issue and kind of what you've been dealing with. He said, "I have you a front row seat. You can sit there. If you want, you can stand up and wave, and then you can just sit back down. But I just want to let you know I'll be mentioning it, and thank you for everything you're doing." But we talked for probably 10 minutes. It was a really cool experience. And so in his speech, I'm sitting in the front row, and he gets to the topic, and he goes, "Gaines, where's Gaines? Come up here." So I had no idea that I was going to be actually on stage with him. So I went up on stage, and I'm sure people have heard of this situation, but he went in to kiss me on the cheek, but I thought he was going to whisper something in my ear. And so I slightly turned my head to hear him. But when I did that, oh my gosh, the media took it and ran with it. Yeah. They were saying that I was repulsed by him and I was dodging his kisses on stage and that he was being extremely creepy and all of these things that were just so not true. So that, for one, opened my eyes to how the media works. I saw articles with comments by me that I never said. They were telling everyone my feelings, which they never asked me my feelings. So how could they gather that information? And so it was a pretty crazy experience, but really, really cool. He was super authentic, probably exactly how you would picture him off stage and off cameras. That's really how he was. So it was a cool experience.
Yeah, that's the sentiment I have about Trump. I don't know him personally. I've covered him quite extensively, but I get the feeling that he just is who he is, right? Mic's on, mic's off. It just is what it is. And you said you believe that to be an authentic response by him, an authentic concern he has about this issue in women's sports. I believe that to be true. The other comment in the chat I think is very important, and it's one that I struggle with a lot, which is that So I'm a woman, right? I'm outspoken on this. I'm front and center talking about it. I'm not even a sports girl, truthfully. I don't know anything about swimming. You know, I love my fitness, but I'm not into sports. But I feel like this is so, so important because I grew up around so many female athletes that were on those basketball scholarships, that were on those, you know, swimming scholarships, whatever it may be. And they had these, you know, big aspirations to compete at a professional level. And I can't imagine them being handicapped to such an extent that they would have to compete against biological males. So I feel compelled to speak out. But there is a problem right now culturally, which is that I see men defending you. You, not just you, people saying what you're saying. I see hordes and hordes and hordes of men coming out and saying, this is wrong. This is not fair to women. This is going to jeopardize the future of women's sports. And I hear a lot of silence from women, not just women who are swimmers, who I can understand. They're concerned about their career. They're concerned about, is this going to be it for me? But women with big microphones who can sit like I am right now and open their mouths are very hesitant to speak because they don't want to be labeled bigoted. They don't want it. They want to be in the woke club, you know? So there is a huge problem where I see a lot of the gutsiness coming from men on this issue, and that's just not going to fix it, right? We need women. We need women to speak out and defend women on this issue. Do you think that that is ever going to change where we can shift that dynamic? Because if women can't speak out to defend women, where are we societally at that point? If we care as women more about catering to a woke mob than about defending what is right and just for women, how can we expect anyone else, like biological men, to defend us if we're not doing it for ourselves?
Exactly. And that's the piece that I've been trying to communicate is that, you know, women, that's who this is directly affecting. This is affecting everyone, regardless of your age, your sex, your race. It's affecting everyone, but it's directly affecting women. And so you're exactly right. If we're not willing to stand up for ourselves, why should we expect other people to be willing to do so? And so I've come across amazing females like yourself who are willing, but there are so many who aren't. And so if there's anything I can do, I want to reiterate that there has been so much support in me speaking out. I've had so many opportunities, job opportunities, so many amazing things come my way because I have been willing to speak out. And like you said earlier, this is something that needs to be handled with volume. The more numbers, the more people will realize that the majority of people do not agree with this. We don't think it's okay, but we can't just sit back and allow this to happen. It's wrong. And that's what I think once women are willing to speak up and start doing so, that's when the tides will turn.
So where does this wind up? My concern here is that on this trajectory, you're going to wind up with men's sports where biological men compete, and then you're going to wind up with women's sports dominated by biological men at some point. And it may not be today, but this is the direction that it's going in. And what happens to actual biological women in sports? Can you just talk to me about, I mean, is this a realistic concern? Is this what's sitting on the minds of young athletes? What are you worried about 5 years, 10 years down the road when you look at what's going on today? It's
definitely a realistic concern. I mean, since really this has hit the media this past March, it's infiltrated in tons of sports. You have Haley Davidson, who was the golfer who was trying to qualify for the LPGA. You have there was a cyclist who got second at U.S. Nationals. It's happening all across the world. I've done several different things in Europe regarding this issue. And so it's happening at a rampant rate. And I think, you know, yes, this year we had one national championship who is a biological male in female sports, but it's only a matter of time before that becomes 3 and then 5 and so on.
So what do you say to the critics who say, oh, it's not a big issue. It's being, you know, enhanced by conservatives and people in media who want to make this a talking point. And we're really only talking about a couple of hundred athletes here, and people should just stop making this bigger than it is. What is your response to those critics?
I want those critics to look at myself and other female athletes who have dedicated their entire lives to perfecting their craft, because that's what it is. And say that and mean it, because yes, it's not happening. You know, there's there's not necessarily stories of domination. I mean, there are, but that's a lot of the argument. But this happening to one athlete is one athlete too many. And this is something that will increase. It's underreported. There's lots of instances that aren't even being talked about. And so it's not transphobic. If this was just simply a biological male, or I guess someone who's not transitioning, I wouldn't be okay with it. So if it was, no matter what this is, when you're putting yourself in a situation where you're have unfair advantages that you can never overcome, no matter what you do, no matter how much training you put in. It's wrong, it's unfair, and it doesn't make me transphobic for believing so.
Talk to me about the athletic governing bodies. If you had a message that you could send to them directly, what would that be?
Well, I think the piece I want to hit on is the lack of accountability. Like I mentioned earlier, there is no one willing to face this issue head on, directly, and say exactly how they feel. It's been a lot of beating around the bush. It's been turning to other organizations. And since, doing this, especially the NCAA, they nominated, UPenn nominated Thomas for NCAA Woman of the Year, which was then approved by the NCAA, which is the highest honor in all of college sports. And to nominate someone who has spent 5% of their life as a female is wrong. We're encouraging that. We're celebrating that. The NCAA is praising this. And it's absolutely wrong and sending the wrong message to young girls, to past female athletes who had to fight for Title IX, and to present female athletes.
What has been the media reaction? You said you have gotten a lot of support, and I've seen some of that unfold. Even when I announced that I was going to be talking to you today, there were a lot of people who were really excited and very supportive of what you've been saying. What has the negative reaction? Have you heard from woke media? Have you gotten messages? What does that look like? Because we have to be realistic. Somebody who does come out and speak out like you is going to face the rash of people who just don't like dissent. In any respect. What does that look like for you? And has that in any way ever made you regret your decision to speak out?
No, I definitely don't regret my decision. But actually, one of the comments I've gotten a lot is, you only do right-wing media. You'll only go on Fox News, blah, blah, blah. I have actually reached out to different left-winged media to just increase the audience who hears my message, and I have been shot down by every single one of them. They are not willing to have this conversation with me. And so I think a lot of my support has been because I'm preaching to people who already agree with me. But when trying to speak with people who don't, it doesn't get me very far because people aren't willing to listen. I actually went on Dr. Phil I don't think it's aired yet, but I did it last week to try and increase that audience because I think it's important. I think more people who are kind of on the fence on the political spectrum, which I hate that this is even political, they need to hear this. They need to hear the facts behind this, because I wholeheartedly believe that it will be Republicans who fix this issue.
Yeah, and unfortunately, everything's political these days. Even stuff you don't want to be political, it just balloons, and that's not surprising to me at all. People in the audience, it's not surprising to me that left-wing media doesn't want to talk to you, and there's a reason why, which is that you're very well spoken. First of all, you have facts on your side, reality. We don't live in the land of fiction, some of us. You're very well spoken, and you're somebody who has done the work and has trained. And the last thing they want to do is face somebody like you. They're not prepared for that debate, and they don't want to lose in front of their audience. So they're just simply not going to have the conversation with you. That's why that's happening. It's sad, but it's a reality. I look forward to that Dr. Phil interview. I think he at least attempts to put people of different opinions on and have that conversation, which is very important. I'm going to check in with the chat in just a second, Natalia. So people in the chat, please, I want to hear your comments, your questions for when we close out the show. I want to ask you a little bit about, you mentioned God a few times in this conversation. What is your faith? Talk to me a little about your faith. What role has faith played for you in all of this? And talk to me a little bit about that sentiment that maybe you were put in this position for a reason. For people who don't have that strong a faith, or who are envious of the faithful, or whatever it may be, that want a little insight into what that experience is like for someone with a strong faith going through this.
Yes. So I grew up in the Church of Christ. Faith has just always been something that's important to me. I lean very heavily on God. I try to practice things that will put me in that position where I'm doing good, not just for myself, but for others. And so once this issue happened, like I said, I hate to say right place, right time, because I don't think anyone should have to necessarily go through this. But I do believe it's kind of a God thing. I think having the whole instance of the trophy situation, tying all of those things, it couldn't have happened more so in a way that could be communicable to others to understand that this is wrong. But yeah, I'm just very big on faith. My parents have always taught me to be unwavering in my values and my morals. And I've really tried to stick to that, which I think has got me to this point.
And we talk a lot about academia. I taught college for a year. I taught middle school, high school, but folks at home, this is why you choose schools like the University of Kentucky, because she's got the backing of her school to speak out. There are other people that are sitting in woke schools across the country that I'm sure feel the same sentiment, but are terrorized because they know that if they speak out, there will be consequences in their school and potentially, where they live. And the country is very different depending upon where you live, where you choose to go to school. These things really matter now more than ever. What has been the hardest part of all of this for you? You seem to be handling this exceptionally well. Obviously, you're somebody who wasn't planning on being in the spotlight in this respect, doing all of these interviews with people like me and, Fox News, whoever it may be. Is there ever a struggle for you throughout this process? If not a hesitation to continue, but just something about it that feels hard, that people can kind of, feel empathy and then just feel what you're going through a little bit.
Right. It's definitely overwhelming. It's put me in a place as a 22-year-old that I was never equipped for. I mean, I didn't study any sort of political science. I don't have any background in public speaking. So in that sense, it's overwhelming. It's a lot. I'm getting asked to fly out on planes and go here and there all the time. And so it's definitely been a lot. I just got married. I just finished.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I had planned on going to dental school this year, but I've kind of put that on hold. I'm going to take a gap year and pursue whatever needs to be pursued here. So it's a lot. It's thrown a wrench kind of at my life, and it's not necessarily all bad things, but it's a lot.
Yeah, and sometimes that's just how it happens. I didn't study political science either. I don't have a journalism degree. I didn't intend to do any of this for a living, certainly not speaking about politics. And I was teaching at a private school on the Upper East Side and thinking, do I want to do something in academia or maybe something in performing arts, but never political. And I saw what was going on in the country and I just started writing. And it was really, that kind of served as an impetus to get involved in all this. I just saw that something was deeply wrong and there was a lot of common sense missing. And that was my move to kind of just speak out. And here I am. So sometimes it just kind of happens that way. And some people feel pulled to kind of make a difference. And I think, my observation with you is that you feel really strongly about this issue. You're living it, right? And it's an opportunity to make a real difference that you've seized upon, which is admirable. Many people could have sat back and chosen not to speak up, knowing there are always consequences to being vocal. But I think there are a lot of people out there, young girls in particular, who are athletes themselves or who are aspiring athletes that really appreciate that you've been outspoken because it helps them. It helps them to have a better shot at a fair system. And it also encourages them in their life, be it on this issue or any other issue, to speak out as well. So I'm appreciative of that. I know many others. So I want to just check in, Natalia. Do we have anything to get to before we? Yeah.
Yes. So we do have one by Stephen Colocotronis. He said, Riley, Chicago got your back. Respect to you. Always keep speaking the truth. God bless you and your family always. And then we did have a question by Robert, which was a pretty good question. He asked, with everything going on, would you be opposed to maybe like transgender, having a transgender, I guess, section for swimming? You know, they have
Like a
women,
separate section.
like a separate.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be something that you would encourage for the future, or would this be something that we should keep like just the two options of a woman and a
Yeah,
and
what
a
do you
boy?
think about that, Riley? Like a separate category, which has been, floated by some.
I think it's a good idea. I think it's a way that everyone can still compete, which I don't think anyone should be denied athletic opportunity, no matter who you are. I think athletics has provided me so much. I don't think anyone should, skip out on that. There's a lot of developmental skills in athletics that I think everyone should be offered. So I think it's a way. There's athletic opportunity, there's athletic success. And things are fair. It's a level playing field across all divisions, all categories. And so while it's not necessarily the most practical in terms of finances and having, an abundant number of people, I do think it's a way to ensure all those things. So I think it's a fair point, especially in a sport like swimming, where it is a bit individualized in a sense where you're competing for yourself. I think that's a definitely something that could be looked into.
And one more question. Would it be opposed to making those categories in all aspects, not just sports? Like having a woman like in jobs and sports and basically anything? Or would you say having it just in like a sports would be acceptable, if that's making sense?
Well, I think sports, like I mentioned earlier, it relies on your biology. It doesn't care about how you identify. It doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care about your happiness, your authenticity. It's straight up science. It's, there's no sort of gray area here. And so I think it's especially important in sports. I think the workforce, relationship wise, that's a different topic. That's a different scenario completely. But I think in sports, this is something that's definitely attainable.
So tell us what you can to close this out. First of all, I want to know if you now have political aspirations. I'm curious because sometimes this stuff happens and suddenly you're like, oh, maybe I will run for office. So do you have political aspirations now in any sense? And what's next for you? What do you want to do? Do you want to continue to swim? Are you like, what can you tell us? I know you probably got stuff going on behind the scenes you can't say, but what would you like to be doing in the next couple of years, say, that we can kind of look out for and stay attuned to in terms of where your career is headed?
So it's actually pretty funny. I told Trump I was going to dental school and he was like, oh, no, you're not. He was like, the red carpet for politics is rolled out for you. This is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so I'm not necessarily ruling anything out. I'm being open-minded. I've actually come to enjoy this side of it more. I never thought I would. But it's interesting. It's interesting to see how this stuff works. I've always been in touch with my political side. But being really informed across all aspects. I really enjoy that piece of it. And so I'm not ruling anything out, but I do have a lot of cool things in the works. But I'm actually still swimming some. I'm training for triathlons. I just signed up for my first half marathon. So I'm still staying very active, which it's fun. It's nice to be on a less intense side of swimming, but still do it.
That's less intense for Riley. Oh, I'm just training for a triathlon. I'm just chilling over here. That's her version of less intense. Oh, man. My version of less intense is like I did 30 minutes on the spin bike and I still pat myself on the back. So I don't know, man. Well, thank you for being here.
Patting on the back, though.
There you go. Everyone, don't forget, hit subscribe, hit your like. I want to thank you so much for being here with us today. I really enjoyed this conversation, and we're gonna keep our eyes glued to what's next. I have a feeling there's going to be some interesting stuff in your future. And Trump is right. Listen, sometimes the door opens for a reason. That's what happened with me, and I chose to step in. And you know what? You can always step back out, right? You can always say, I don't want to do this anymore. But sometimes these moments only come across once in a lifetime. So enjoy it. Be yourself, speak your mind. And I'm deeply appreciative that you chose to come and sit with us today and share your story. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you did too. And say hi to the parents and to Kentucky. I haven't been to Kentucky, but I'm going to have to go check it out.
I know it. I know. Well, I thank you for having me on and allowing me to speak for myself and other female athletes. It means a lot. So thank you.
Awesome. You have a great day, Riley.
You too. Bye.
Bye. All right, everyone. So we're going to close out for today. I had a couple of things I was potentially going to do afterward, but this was a really great interview. I'm going to let it stand alone. I'm going to be back on Friday. We're going to do some politics on Friday. We also have the one, the only, Jesse Kelly. He's going to be here. You know he's not going to pull any punches, so you know that's going to be heated. It's going to be spicy. He's going to talk about that hamburger he makes, too, with cheese inside that you all love so much. I want to know what makes it so special, honestly. Does he use a certain kind of cheese? I don't know, man. I think there's been a lot of hype about that burger, and I don't know if it could meet the challenge. We're going to discuss it all on Friday. Thank you for being with us today. Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We will be back. Thoroughly enjoyed this. Hope you did, too. See you soon.